She looked up from the counter and said, "We're closed." I stood in the doorway dripping rainwater onto the tile, still wearing the suit I had worn to put my grandmother in the ground 2 days earlier. The tie was in my pocket. The jacket smelled like rental car and highway coffee. Behind me, the road was underwater. Ahead of me, a woman with a dish towel over her shoulder and absolutely no interest in company. "The road's flooded," I said. She looked past me through the glass, then back at my face. Something shifted. "Sit down," she said, "but I'm making the last pot of coffee this place will ever see, so don't waste it." I didn't ask what she meant by that. I just sat. The booth was the kind they don't make anymore. Red vinyl, split along the seams, with duct tape holding the corner together. The table had a wobble. Someone had shoved a folded sugar packet under one leg, probably years ago. It was still there, still working. "My name is Caleb. I'm 34. And 2 days earlier, I had buried the woman who raised me in a cemetery outside Greenfield, Ohio, while 11 people stood in the rain and pretended we were enough. We weren't enough. She deserved 100. She deserved the whole county, lined up along the fence. But 11 was what she got, because that's what happens when you outlive most of the people who loved you. I had stayed in a motel afterward. Not because I needed to. Because going home meant the drive was over, and the drive was the last thing that still felt like a task, like something to do next. Once I parked my car in my own driveway, I would just be a man whose grandmother was dead and whose apartment had nothing in the fridge. So I drove slow, I took back roads, I stopped twice for gas I didn't need. And then the rain came. Not the usual kind. The kind that turns ditches into rivers and rivers into problems. The kind where you pull over not because you're cautious, but because your wipers can't keep up and you can't see 10 feet past the hood. I saw the diner's sign first. Just a glow through the water on the windshield. No name I could read. I pulled into the lot. 3 parking spaces, all empty. The windows were lit but barely, like someone had left a lamp on and forgotten. I sat in the car for a minute, maybe 2, watching the rain hit the asphalt in sheets. My phone said the road ahead was closed. My phone said the road behind me was manageable but getting worse. My phone said I had 1 missed call from my cousin, who I did not want to talk to. I got out. The rain was warm. That's the part people forget about summer storms in the middle of nowhere. The water isn't cold, it hits your shoulders and your head, and it's almost gentle, which makes it worse somehow. Cold rain is an emergency. Warm rain is just sadness with better aim. I pushed open the door. A bell jingled, and she looked up from the counter with a rag in her hand and told me they were closed. The diner was small, not small like cozy, small like it had always been this size and the world had gotten bigger around it. 6 booths along the window, a counter with 8 stools, 4 of them patched with electrical tape, a pie case that was empty except for a single slice of something yellow. Lemon, maybe, or banana cream that had given up. The walls were the thing. Everywhere I looked, there was something tacked up, taped up, pinned to the paneling. Photographs in frames that didn't match. A framed dollar bill with a date written in marker. A newspaper clipping about a high school football team, yellowed and curling at the edges. A child's drawing of the diner itself, with a sun in the corner that had a face on it. It was the kind of wall that takes 30 years to build, not decorated, accumulated. "How long has this place been open?" I asked. She didn't turn around. She was doing something behind the counter with a coffee maker that looked like it belonged in a museum. 42 years, she said. 42 years and about 6 hours. What happens in 6 hours? Dawn, and then it's done. I let that settle. I watched her hands, they moved fast, confident. She wasn't sad about it. Or if she was, she'd already processed that part and moved on to the version of herself that just got things done. Her name was Margot. She told me that later. But I'll tell you now because I'm tired of writing she like she didn't have a name. Margot was maybe mid-30s. Brown hair pulled back with a clip that kept slipping. No jewelry. She wore a t-shirt that said Ridley's on the front in faded letters, which I guessed was the name of the diner, and an apron over it that had seen better decades. She moved behind the counter the way people move in spaces they've memorized. Not looking where she reached, just reaching. "You work here?" I asked. "For 8 years. She set a mug in front of me, white ceramic, a chip on the rim, waitress, cook, janitor, accountant, depends on the day. "And today?" "Today I'm the person who locks the door for good." The coffee maker started to gurgle. It sounded tired. She leaned against the counter and crossed her arms and looked at me the way you look at a stray cat that followed you home. Not hostile, just assessing how much trouble I was going to be. "You're soaked," she said. I noticed. "There are napkins on the table. That's the best I can do." I pulled a handful from the dispenser and pressed them against my face. They fell apart immediately. Cheap napkins. The kind that dissolve the second they touch water. She almost smiled. You want cream with that? Black is fine. Good, because I threw the cream out an hour ago. The coffee was strong. The kind that doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. I could feel it in my chest. Hot and a little burnt, and exactly right for a night like this. I'm Caleb, I said. I didn't ask. I know. I'm telling you anyway. She looked at me for a second. Then she said, Margot. That was the whole introduction. No handshake, no small talk about where I was from or what I did for a living. Just two names dropped onto the counter like coins. I liked her for that. I liked her for a lot of things in the next few hours, but I liked her first for that. The rain hit the windows in waves. Inside, the diner hummed with the sound of the coffee maker and the refrigerator and the fluorescent light above the pie case, which buzzed at a frequency that felt personal, like it was trying to tell me something. I looked at the wall nearest my booth. A photograph in a wooden frame. Two men standing in front of the diner, both in aprons, both squinting at the camera. One of them held a spatula like a trophy. Below it, written in pen on the mat, was a date. 1983. Who are they? Margot glanced over. Bill Ridley and his brother Tom, they opened the place. Bill did the cooking, Tom did the talking. Which one's which? Bill's the one with the spatula. Tom's the one who looks like he's about to tell you a joke. I could see it. Tom had that kind of face. The kind that holds a laugh just behind the eyes. Are they still around? Bill died in 2009. Tom moved to Florida and sends a Christmas card every year with a picture of his cat. She said it flat, not cold, just factual. The way you talk about people when the grief has dried into something lighter. Not forgetting. Just the version that doesn't cost you anything to say out loud. I knew that version. I was trying to get there myself. 2 days in and I was still on the version where everything felt like it had a sharp edge. My grandmother's name was Ruth. She was 87. She had lived alone in the same house for 21 years after my grandfather died and never once called it lonely. She called it quiet. She said quiet was a choice and lonely was a complaint, and she didn't have time for complaints because she had tomatoes that needed caging. She raised me from the time I was 9. My mother's situation was complicated and my grandmother's was simple. She had a room. I needed one. She never made it feel like charity. She made it feel like I was doing her a favor by eating her cooking. I hadn't cried at the funeral. I keep waiting for someone to ask about that, but nobody has. I think people saw the suit and the dry eyes and thought I was holding it together. I wasn't holding anything together. I was just numb. Numb looks a lot like composed if you don't know the difference. The coffee was half gone. I set the mug down and stared at the rain. You came from somewhere specific, Margot said. Not a question. A funeral. She didn't say sorry. She didn't tilt her head. She just nodded once, like I'd confirmed something she'd already guessed. That suit's been through it, she said. 2 days in this suit, one in the church, one in the car. You should burn it after. I might. She poured herself a cup from the pot, stood on the other side of the counter. We drank in silence for a while, not the awkward kind, the kind that happens when two people decide at the same time that words aren't required. Outside, the rain kept coming. It sounded like applause. I thought about the glove box. I had been thinking about it since the motel, if I'm honest. Before the service, my cousin had handed me a stack of things from my grandmother's desk, bills mostly, a few birthday cards she'd saved, a recipe for something called strawberry pretzel salad that I knew by heart because she made it every 4th of July. And a letter. Unsealed. My name on the front in her handwriting, which had gotten shaky in the last year but was still hers. Still the same hand that had written my permission slips and signed my report cards and left notes on the kitchen counter that said things like, "Soup in the fridge, don't let it boil, I mean it." I hadn't opened it. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment, which is the lie you tell when you're afraid of what something might say. Or worse, afraid of what it might not say. Afraid it would be ordinary. A list of things to cancel. Instructions about the house. Nothing that would make me feel like she was still talking to me. It was in the glove box of the rental car, sitting under the registration and a packet of tissues I'd taken from the funeral home, getting rained on from the outside, while I sat getting rained on from the inside. Both of us just waiting. Margot put a second cup in front of me without asking. "Last pot," she said. "Might as well." I wrapped my hands around it. The warmth felt like company. The clock on the wall behind her said 11:14. I did the math. 7 hours until dawn. 7 hours in a diner that was about to stop existing, with a woman who seemed perfectly fine being alone, and a letter I couldn't bring myself to read. The fluorescent light above the pie case flickered once, then steadied. Margot picked up a cardboard box from behind the counter and started pulling things off the wall. Carefully. One frame at a time, she held each one for a second before wrapping it in newspaper and setting it inside. "You need help with that?" I asked. She didn't look up. "I've been doing this since 6, I think I can manage." But she didn't say no, and she didn't say leave. The rain pressed against the windows like it was trying to get in, and I sat in a dead woman's suit in a dying diner and drank the last coffee it would ever make, and watched a stranger take a building apart, piece by piece with her bare hands. Something about the way she handled those frames, gentle and efficient at the same time, like she'd already said goodbye to each one privately, and this was just the physical part. I recognized that. I was doing the same thing with a letter I couldn't open. She set a frame face down in the box and looked up at me, just for a second. "You can stay until the road clears," she said, "but I'm not making conversation. I have 30 years of this place to fit into 12 boxes, and I'm behind schedule." "Fair enough. And if you finish that coffee, wash the mug. I'm not leaving dirty dishes for a building that's about to be nothing." I almost smiled. For the first time in 2 days, I almost smiled. The rain wasn't going to stop. I could feel it the way you feel weather in your knees or your lower back. This was the kind of storm that settles in, that picks a county and stays for the night. Which meant I was staying too, in this booth with this coffee, in this suit that smelled like someone else's car in a cemetery I would never visit again. And across the counter, a woman named Margot was boxing up 42 years of a life that wasn't hers, but had become hers anyway. The way things do when you stay long enough. When you show up every day until the place can't remember what it looked like without you in it. I didn't know her story yet. I didn't know what she was leaving behind or what she was driving toward. I didn't know that by morning, the woman standing 5 feet from me with newspaper ink on her fingers would say something that would change the way I thought about every quiet thing my grandmother ever told me. All I knew right then was that the coffee was good, the rain wasn't stopping, and for the first time in 2 days, I didn't want to be anywhere else. The coffee was good, and the rain wasn't stopping, and I was still sitting in that booth when Margot pulled a roll of packing tape from under the counter and tore off a strip with her teeth. She pressed it across the top of a box, sealed it shut and set it on the floor next to 2 others already packed. Then she grabbed an empty one and moved to the next section of wall. I watched her work. She had a system: start at the top right corner, move left, move down. Each frame came off the nail with a slight tug. She'd hold it in front of her for a beat, turn it over, wrap it in a sheet of newspaper, and set it inside the box. Quick and practiced, like she'd rehearsed this in her head a dozen times before tonight. I stood up. "Let me help." She didn't turn around. "I told you, I'm not making conversation. I'm not offering conversation, I'm offering to carry boxes." She paused with a frame in her hands, a small one. Wood border, glass front, the kind you buy at a drugstore. She looked at me the way you look at someone who just volunteered for a job they don't understand. "You don't have to do that." "I know. I mean it. You just buried someone, you should be sitting down." "I've been sitting down for 2 days, in a car, in a motel, in a church pew. I'm tired of sitting." Something in that landed. I could see it in the way her shoulders dropped half an inch. Not a big movement, but enough to tell me she was carrying weight in them. "Fine," she said. "Start with the chairs." I started with the chairs. They were mismatched. 4 wooden ones with spindle backs, 2 metal ones with green cushions, a couple of folding chairs leaning against the far wall. The kind of collection that happens when things break, and you replace them with whatever you can find. Margot pointed to a corner near the kitchen door. "Stack them there, legs up." I flipped the first one over. It was heavier than it looked. Solid wood, scratched to nothing on the bottom of the legs from decades of being dragged across tile. I stacked it and grabbed the next one. We worked without talking for a while. Her at the walls, me at the furniture. The rain filled the silence for us. It was a good silence. Not the kind where you're trying to think of something to say. The kind where both people have quietly agreed that the work is enough. I wiped down a table with the rag she'd left on the counter. The surface was sticky with years of coffee rings and syrup spots that had been cleaned 1,000 times but never quite gave up. I scrubbed harder than I needed to. It felt good to clean something, to make a surface empty and leave it better than I found it. That table's going to the dump, Margot said from across the room. You don't have to polish it. I know. Then why are you scrubbing it like it owes you money? I stopped, looked down at my hands. They were red from the pressure. I don't know, I said, and I meant it. She watched me for a second. Then she turned back to the wall and took down a photograph of a woman in an apron standing in front of the diner's entrance. The awning in the photo was striped red and white. It wasn't striped anymore. Now it was just sun-bleached gray. Dorothy Ridley, Bill's wife. She ran the register for 26 years. Every Saturday she made a chocolate cake and left it on the counter with a sign that said birthday cake for whoever needs one. Did people take it? Every week. She'd cut it into 12 slices and by noon they'd all be gone. Margot wrapped the photo carefully. 2 sheets of newspaper. She smoothed the edges before setting it in the box. Dorothy died in 2014. Bill was already gone by then. After that, Tom paid someone to keep the place open. Then Tom stopped paying, and I just kept showing up. She said it without self-pity. Just a fact the way you report what happened. Why? I asked. Because somebody had to. I picked up a stack of laminated menus from the nearest booth and brought them to the counter. The top one had a coffee stain in the shape of a kidney bean. The specials were listed in marker on a clip-on insert that said Thursday at the top. What was the Thursday special? She almost smiled, the same almost smile from earlier, like it got halfway to her mouth and then thought better of it. Meatloaf, she said, with mashed potatoes and green beans from a can, $3.95. $3.95. Bill never raised the prices. Dorothy never let him. And after they were gone, I didn't see the point. I set the menus in a neat pile, 8 of them, 2 with cracks in the lamination. One had a child's crayon, drawing on the back. A circle with legs that could have been a dog or a horse, or anything a 4-year-old thought was worth remembering. We kept working. She told me things in small pieces, never a full story but corners of stories, like she was handing me puzzle pieces one at a time and trusting me to not ask what the picture looked like. The diner had a regular named Walt, who came every morning at 5:30 and ordered the same thing for 11 years. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, black coffee. He sat at the 3rd stool from the left, never the 2nd or the 4th, only the 3rd. What happened to Walt? He's still alive. He just drives to the McDonald's in Holbrook now. That's sad. That's Tuesday. I laughed, short and surprised. The first laugh I'd had since before the funeral. It came out of me like something that had been stuck. Margot looked over. She didn't say anything about it. She just handed me a box. This one's heavy. Books and menus and the guest book from the counter. Don't drop it. I took it. Our hands overlapped on the cardboard for a second. Maybe 2. Her fingers were cold. Mine were warm from the scrubbing. Neither of us moved right away. Then she let go and turned back to the wall. And I carried the box to the stack by the kitchen door and set it down carefully and did not think about her cold fingers for at least 45 seconds. Which is a lie. I thought about them immediately. I thought about them while I wiped down the next table and the one after that. I thought about the way she'd held the frames, firm and gentle at the same time. The way you hold something that used to mean everything and now means something different, something you're still figuring out. You mentioned a funeral, she said. She was kneeling by the wall now, working on a lower row of photographs. Her back was to me. My grandmother. Were you close? She raised me. Margot stopped wrapping. She stayed still for a moment. Then she resumed slower than before. I'm sorry. It was the first time she'd said it. And she said it the right way. Not rushed, not as a reflex. Like she meant the actual word. Like she was sorry that the world had taken someone from me, and she couldn't do anything about it except say so. She left me a letter, I said. I don't know why I told her that. I hadn't told anyone, not my cousin, not the funeral director, not the woman at the motel front desk who asked if I was okay when I checked out with red eyes. But I told Margot, standing in a diner that was closing forever, holding a wet rag in one hand and nothing in the other. What does it say? I don't know. I haven't opened it. She turned around, looked at me. How long have you had it? 2 days. And you haven't read it? No. Why not? I wrung the rag in my hands. Water dripped onto the tile. Because right now she's still talking to me. The second I open it, she's done. Margot didn't respond to that. She just looked at me for a long time. Long enough that I could hear the rain and the refrigerator and the fluorescent light, all at once, like the room had gotten quieter to make space for whatever she was thinking. Then she stood up, brushed off her knees. "I understand that," she said. And I believed her. We went back to working. But the rhythm had changed. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It had something in it, a temperature and a texture, like the air in a room after someone opens a window. She started talking more. Not a flood of words, just a slow leak. Things she probably hadn't said out loud before. The diner was owned by a holding company now. Some outfit out of Columbus that had bought the building and the lot. They were going to tear it down and put in a storage facility. Self-storage units, the kind with orange doors and combination locks. 42 years of birthday cake, she said, and it's going to be replaced by a place where people keep the stuff they can't throw away. She told me she'd worked here since she was 27. She'd come to town with a boyfriend who lasted 3 months. She'd stayed because the town was quiet and the diner needed someone, and she didn't have a better plan. 8 years, I said. 8 years. That's a long time to not have a plan. She looked at me sideways. Says the man who's been driving around in a funeral suit for 2 days. Fair point. So what's the plan now? I asked. Leave. That's the whole plan. Lock the door and drive north. North where? I haven't decided. That's not much of a plan. It's more than I had last week. There was a knock on the door. We both turned. Through the rain-streaked glass I could see a figure in a yellow rain jacket 2 sizes too big. Margot's face changed. Not a lot, just a softening around the edges. She went to the door and opened it. An older man stepped in, maybe 70. White hair plastered to his forehead from the rain. He had a plastic grocery bag in one hand and bifocals that were completely fogged. I saw the light on, he said. Harold, it's after midnight. I know what time it is. He took off the bifocals and wiped them on his jacket, which only made them worse. I came to say goodbye to the place. Margot stepped aside. Harold walked in slowly. He looked around the room the way you look around a church or a hospital room after someone's gone, taking inventory of the things that hadn't changed and the things that already had. He noticed the bare patches on the walls, the stacked chairs, the boxes. You're packing up. Dawn, Margot said. That's when I hand over the keys. Harold nodded. He set the grocery bag on the counter. Blueberry muffins, he said. Lucille made them. She said you shouldn't close a kitchen without feeding somebody one last time. Margot opened the bag, looked inside. Her jaw tightened for just a second. The kind of tightening that means you're about to feel something, and you're choosing not to. Tell Lucille thank you. Tell her yourself. She's awake. She'll be awake all night. She hasn't slept right since her hip. And she wanted to come, but I told her the roads were bad. Harold looked at me. I was standing by the booth with a rag in my hand and someone else's suit on my back. Who's this? Caleb, Margot said, stranded. In here? On the road. The flood. Harold nodded like that explained everything. He extended his hand and I shook it. His grip was firm and brief. Harold Meeks, he said. I've been eating breakfast in this building since 1987. That's a lot of breakfasts. 12,000, give or take, minus the 2 weeks I spent in the hospital after my gallbladder, and Margot still charged me for the coffee I missed. I did not, Margot said. She absolutely did. Margot was fighting the smile again. This time it almost won. Harold stood there for another minute. He touched the counter with his palm. Just rested it there, like he was checking if the surface still felt the same. All right, he said. I'll get out of your hair. You don't have to go, Harold. I do. Lucille's got her ear pressed to the phone, waiting for me to tell her how the place looks. He put his fogged bifocals back on. They were still streaked. You did good, Margot. You kept this place alive longer than anyone thought. He said it simply, without ceremony. Then he pulled his rain jacket tighter and walked back out into the storm. The bell jingled and the door closed, and the diner felt emptier than it had 10 minutes ago. Margot stood by the counter with the bag of muffins. She didn't move for a while. I didn't say anything. Some moments don't want words, they want company. She took a muffin out of the bag, set it on a napkin, and slid it across the counter toward me. Eat, she said, so I ate. The muffin was dense and warm, with real blueberries, not the fake kind, the kind of muffin someone makes when they want the act of baking to say what they can't. Margot took one for herself. We stood on opposite sides of the counter and ate in silence while the rain did its work outside, and the clock on the wall ticked past 12:30. She reached up and took down the last photo on the wall behind the counter. This one she held longer than the others. It was a group shot, maybe 15 people crowded into the frame, standing in front of the diner, some in aprons, some in street clothes. A banner behind them that read Ridley's 30th anniversary. "I'm in this one," she said. I looked. Far right, partially cut off by the edge of the frame. A younger Margot, hair down, standing slightly behind a woman who might have been Dorothy. "You look happy," I said. I was. She wrapped it in 2 sheets of newspaper, smoothed the edges, and set it in the box. Then she closed the lid. The letter was in my car, 20 feet away, on the other side of a door and a rainstorm. I could feel it out there the way you feel a conversation you need to have, present and patient and not going anywhere. I reached for my back pocket and then stopped. Margot noticed. She didn't ask, but she noticed. And that was worse. Because someone noticing what you're afraid to do is the first step toward having to do it. She picked up the packing tape, tore off a strip, sealed the last box with the anniversary photo inside. "You should open it," she said, not looking at me, focused on smoothing the tape flat with her thumb. "The letter, whatever it says, it's already true. Reading it doesn't change that." I wanted to tell her she was right. I wanted to tell her I'd been carrying that envelope like a grenade for 2 days, and I was terrified that what was inside would be ordinary. That my grandmother's last words to me would be about utility bills or the broken step on the back porch. That the letter would be practical when I needed it to be personal. But I didn't say any of that. Just picked up the rag and started wiping down the last table, and Margot let me. The diner was half-packed now. The walls were mostly bare. You could see the shapes where the frames had been, rectangles of brighter paneling surrounded by decades of grease and kitchen smoke. Like tan lines on a wall, evidence of the things that used to be there. I looked at those blank spaces and thought about my grandmother's house. How it would look when someone emptied it. How the walls would have the same ghost shapes where her calendar hung, where the cross-stitch sampler lived that said, "This kitchen is seasoned with love," where the school photo of me at age 10 smiled down at every meal she cooked alone for 21 years. Margot was watching me look at the walls. I could feel it. "You're thinking about her house," she said. "Yeah. It's the same thing, isn't it? Taking a life off the walls." I set the rag down. The table was clean. Cleaner than it needed to be for a building that would be rubble in a month. Outside, the rain shifted. Not lighter, but different in pitch, like the storm was settling in for a longer conversation on the roof. Through the window, I could see the parking lot filling with water. My rental car sat in 3 inches of it, the headlights dark, the glove box holding the one thing I couldn't bring myself to reach for. Margot poured the last of the coffee, split it between 2 mugs, handed me one. "Harold's right," she said. "Lucille does make good muffins." He seemed like a good guy. He's the best guy. He'll outlive all of us out of pure stubbornness. We stood there with our coffee, the bare walls around us, the boxes stacked by the kitchen door, the empty booth seats and the scrubbed tables and the one remaining thing on the wall. A small brass hook near the front door where a set of keys hung on a piece of twine. Margot looked at those keys, then she looked at me. "The rain's not stopping tonight," she said. "No. Which means you're stuck here." "Seems that way." "Which means I have company, whether I wanted it or not." I took a sip of the coffee. It was lukewarm now, the last cup from the last pot. "You could always lock me out." I could. She wrapped both hands around her mug. "But then I'd have to carry all these boxes myself." And there it was. Not a smile, but something better. The corner of her mouth moved, just a fraction, the kind of movement that costs a guarded person something to make. The jukebox sat in the far corner, unplugged, covered in a layer of dust. It was the old kind, glass front and chrome trim, with rows of record labels visible behind the display. It looked like it hadn't been turned on in years. The cord was coiled on the floor behind it, tucked between the machine and the wall. Margot followed my eyes. "Don't even think about it," she said. I wasn't thinking anything. "You were looking at the jukebox." I was looking at the corner. "The jukebox is in the corner." Coincidence. She shook her head, but the fraction of her mouth moved again, a little further this time, and the rain kept falling, and the clock kept ticking past 1 in the morning, and somewhere between the empty walls and the packed boxes, something was changing between us that neither of us had agreed to. Margot was staring at the jukebox again. I caught her doing it while she wiped down the counter for the 3rd time. Her rag moved in small circles over the same clean spot, and her eyes were on the corner. "Go ahead," I said. Go ahead, what? Plug it in. She dropped the rag. It hasn't worked right in 2 years. The B-side selector sticks and it only plays the left speaker. So plug it in anyway. She looked at me, then at the jukebox, then back at me. Like, she was trying to figure out if I was making fun of her or giving her permission to do something she'd already decided to do. She walked over to the corner, crouched behind the machine, and plugged the cord into the wall. Nothing happened for a second. Then the front panel lit up, a warm amber glow behind the glass, lighting up the rows of record labels inside. The chrome trim caught the light and threw it across the far wall in thin lines. The diner looked different with the jukebox on, softer, like someone had turned back the clock by 5 years just by adding one more source of light. Margot pressed a button. Something clicked inside the machine. A record dropped, the needle found the groove, and a song I didn't recognize started playing through the one working speaker. Slow and scratchy and a little too quiet, like someone singing from another room. She stood there for a moment with one hand resting on top of the jukebox, her fingers spread across the glass. Dorothy used to play this every Friday night, she said. She'd turn it up loud enough that the kitchen could hear it. Bill would whistle along while he cooked. What song is it? I don't even know the name. I just know the number, B7. The song filled the room the way only old music can, not demanding attention, just taking up space that was empty before. The rain and the music and the hum of the refrigerator made a kind of accidental harmony. None of it belonged together, and all of it fit. Margot sat down on the stool closest to the jukebox. She pulled one knee up and rested her chin on it. Her hair had come loose from the clip on one side and she hadn't fixed it. I stayed in the booth across the room. We listened without talking. The song was maybe 3 minutes long, and when it ended, the jukebox clicked and the needle lifted and there was a moment of nothing before it started again. The same song, B7, on repeat. It does that, she said. Get stuck on the same track. I don't mind. Neither do I. The second time through, I started noticing things I'd missed. The melody was simple. Piano and a voice that sounded like someone who used to be famous and wasn't anymore. The kind of song that doesn't try to make you feel something. It just lets you feel whatever you were already carrying. And what I was carrying was a letter in the glove box of a rental car. I looked at my hands. They were still red from scrubbing the tables. I thought about my grandmother's hands, how they got thinner near the end. How she'd press her fingers together when she was thinking about something she didn't want to say yet. How she'd flatten envelopes before sealing them, running her thumb along the crease like she was smoothing out the words inside. I'm going to get it, I said. Margot looked up. The letter, it's in the car, and I'm going to go get it. She didn't say anything, she just watched me stand up and walk to the door. The rain had slowed, not stopped, but the kind of rain you can walk through without feeling like you're fighting it. I pushed open the door and stepped into the parking lot. The water was up to my ankles, warm like before. The sky was dark and low and close like a ceiling that had dropped a few feet overnight. I opened the car door. The dome light came on, pale and yellow. The glove box latch stuck for a second and then gave. I moved the registration and the funeral home tissues and the envelope. My name in her handwriting. The seal still open, the flap just folded in. I held it for a second. The paper was damp from the humidity, not wet but soft at the edges. It felt fragile in a way that had nothing to do with paper. I closed the glove box and sat there in the car with the door open and the rain tapping the roof, holding the last thing my grandmother would ever give me. Then I got out and walked back through the water to the diner. The bell jingled. Margot was still on the stool. The jukebox was playing B7 for the third time. I sat down at the counter and set the envelope between us. We both looked at it. You don't have to read it out loud, she said. I know. I'm just saying, if it's private. I know. I picked it up, unfolded the flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper, notebook paper, the kind with the wide lines and the red margin. The kind she'd always used because she said college ruled was too small, and her eyes weren't getting any younger. Her handwriting was shaky, but it was still hers. I'd know it anywhere. I read it to myself first. Then I read it again. Then I set it down on the counter and pressed my palms flat against the surface and breathed. What does it say? Margot asked, quiet, like she wasn't sure she should be asking. I picked it up again and read it out loud. Not because she asked, but because I needed to hear it in the air. Caleb, I know you're going to drive too fast and eat bad food and sleep in your car instead of stopping like a normal person. Slow down. The world doesn't need you to arrive, it needs you to notice the road. I spent 62 years married to a man who was always in a hurry to get somewhere, and the only thing he ever said he regretted was not stopping more. So stop, honey. Eat a real meal and talk to a stranger. Let someone be kind to you, even if you don't think you deserve it right now. You do, and you always did. I love you, and I will love you from wherever I end up next. Don't rush. Love, Grandma Ruth. The jukebox clicked and B7 started over. I didn't cry. My eyes got hot and my throat closed up, and I pressed my hands harder against the counter, and the feeling moved through me like warm water, not a wave but a slow tide that reached every part of me at once. Margot didn't move. She sat on her stool with her chin on her knee, and she waited. She waited the way you wait for someone who is standing at the edge of something. Patient and still, not pushing but present. She knew, I said. Knew what? She knew I'd be driving through the middle of nowhere at 1 in the morning. She knew I'd skip meals and keep going. She knew all of it. Of course she did. She raised you. That sentence hit me harder than the letter. Because it was true. She didn't write that letter because she was dying. She wrote it because she knew me. Because she knew exactly what I'd do when she was gone, and she wanted to interrupt the pattern before it set. Slow down and stop and let someone be kind to you. I was sitting in a closed diner at 1:30 in the morning, eating a stranger's muffin, listening to a broken jukebox, talking to a woman I'd met 3 hours ago. And every single thing my grandmother had told me to do, I was doing. Not on purpose, but by some accident that didn't feel accidental anymore. Maybe she'd known about that too. Margot reached across the counter. She didn't touch my hand. She put her fingers on the edge of the letter, just barely, like she was holding it in place so it wouldn't drift away. My mom used to write letters like that, she said. I looked up. Not goodbye letters, just regular letters. She lived 2 hours away and she called every Sunday, but she'd still write me letters during the week. Little things. What she planted in the garden, what the neighbor's dog did, whether the new priest was any good. When did she stop? Margot's fingers pressed a little harder against the paper. 4 years ago, a stroke took her fast and sudden. She was watering the garden one afternoon and then she was gone. The jukebox hummed between us. The same song, the same scratchy speaker, the same 3 minutes on loop, and the rain on the roof, lighter now, less insistent, like it was starting to lose interest in us. Is that why you stayed? I asked. At the diner? She pulled her hand back from the letter and rested it in her lap. Partly. She loved this place. She came here twice when she visited. Both times she ordered the meatloaf. Both times she said it was better than hers. Which was a lie, by the way. My mom's meatloaf could make grown men emotional. She paused and looked at the bare walls. I could see her eyes moving across the empty spaces where the photographs used to hang, counting the ghosts of frames the way I'd counted them earlier. If you're watching this and any of it is landing, subscribe. There are more stories like this one, and they're all waiting. I stayed because staying was easier than figuring out what I wanted. This place gave me a reason to get up at 5 every morning, and a reason to fall asleep at 9 every night. 8 years of reasons. And then they sold the building, and the reason stopped, and I had to look at my life without any of the usual distractions and figure out what was left. What was left? Me. Just me. And a car with 140,000 miles on it and a suitcase I haven't unpacked since I moved here. You never unpacked? I unpacked the clothes. The suitcase is still in the closet, full of books and my mom's photo album and a blanket she crocheted that still smells like her dryer sheets. She stopped and studied my face. You're going to ask why. I'm not going to ask why. Everybody asks why. I'm not everybody. She looked at me then. Not the way she had before, when she was assessing whether I was going to be trouble or figuring out how much of the truth to give me. This was different. This was the look you give someone when you realize they understand the thing you've been trying not to explain. I kept the suitcase packed, she said, because as long as it was packed, I could still leave. It meant I hadn't decided to stay. Even after 8 years, I was still just passing through. And now you're leaving for real. Now I'm leaving for real. How does it feel? She picked up her coffee mug. It was empty. She looked into it anyway, the way people look into empty cups when they need somewhere to put their eyes. Terrifying, she said, and also like exhaling. Like I've been holding my breath for 8 years and I didn't know it until right now. The letter sat between us on the counter, my grandmother's words in shaky handwriting on wide-ruled paper. Slow down and stop and let someone be kind to you. I folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and slid it into my jacket pocket, against my chest, where I could feel the edges through the fabric. "Your grandmother sounds like she was something," Margot said. She was. She made strawberry pretzel salad every 4th of July, and she grew tomatoes that won the county fair twice. And she raised a kid who wasn't hers because nobody else was going to do it. She raised you right. She raised me stubborn. The right part I'm still working on. Margot smiled. The real kind this time, not the corner of her mouth, not the fraction, but the kind that reached her eyes and stayed there for 2 full seconds before she remembered she was supposed to be guarded. The rain had changed again. I could hear it, still falling, but thinner now, without the weight it had carried all night. Through the window, the parking lot water looked lower, maybe by an inch, maybe less. But the difference was there, and we both knew what it meant. The flood would recede, the road would clear. Dawn would come, and with it the keys to hand over and the door to lock for the last time. Our time was running out. I could feel it the way you feel a Sunday evening when Monday is already sitting in the next room with its shoes on. The way you feel the last few pages of a book you don't want to finish. Margot set the empty mug on the counter. The sound was small and final. "The rain's slowing down," she said. "Yeah. It'll clear up by morning." "Probably." She looked at the jukebox. B7 was still playing, the needle tracking through the same groove it had carved 1,000 times before. The amber glow behind the glass was the warmest thing in the room. "I never told anyone about the suitcase," she said. "I never read the letter out loud before." We sat with that for a while. Two people who had just handed each other something they didn't give away easily. Not secrets, but something bigger than secrets. The quiet, careful truths that people keep folded up and tucked away, because saying them out loud makes them real, and real is the scariest thing there is when you've been hiding from it. And real was terrifying, but real was also the only thing either of us had left. The jukebox clicked. The needle lifted. For the first time all night, it didn't start over. But the music was gone, and the diner was silent except for the rain and the refrigerator, and the sound of two people breathing in the same room, deciding what to do with the hours they had left before the sun came up, and the water went down and the world started asking them to move again. The silence lasted long enough to matter. Not the uncomfortable kind. The kind that happens when two people have said the truest things they know how to say, and there's nothing left to do but sit with it. The jukebox light still glowed amber behind the glass, but the needle sat in its cradle, and B7 had finished its last rotation. Margot looked at the clock. I followed her eyes. 4:17. The rain had thinned to something you'd barely call rain at all, more like the sky remembering what it had done and slowing to a stop. Through the diner window, I could see the parking lot. The water was draining. Not fast, but steady. The kind of retreat that doesn't announce itself. It just happens while you're looking at something else. "The road's going to open," she said. "Yeah. Couple hours, maybe. Maybe less." She didn't say anything to that. She got up from the stool and walked behind the counter and started pulling the plug on the coffee maker. The machine let out a small hiss, like it had been holding its breath all night, and just let go. I watched her hands. She disconnected the coffee maker, coiled the cord, and set the machine inside a box lined with newspaper. Then the toaster. Then a small radio I hadn't noticed, wedged between the napkin dispenser and the wall, each one wrapped in paper, each one placed with the same careful firmness she'd used on the picture frames. She was taking a building apart and turning it into boxes, and in a few hours the boxes would go into a car, and the car would go north, and the building would go to a company in Columbus that would knock it down and put up orange doors with combination locks. I got up and started wiping the counter. She looked at me, but didn't tell me to stop. We cleaned in a rhythm we hadn't discussed. She worked behind the counter while I worked in front of it. She emptied the shelves and I swept the floor. She unplugged the refrigerator, and the hum that had been there all night, steady and low and constant as a heartbeat, stopped. The diner got quieter than I thought a room could get. Without the refrigerator and the coffee maker and the jukebox, the only sound was the drip of the rain gutters outside and the soft scrape of the broom on tile. It felt like the building was exhaling, letting go of the sounds it had held for 42 years, one by one, until there was nothing left to hum or click or buzz. Margot stood in the middle of the floor and turned in a slow circle, taking inventory. The walls were bare, the chairs were stacked, and the boxes were lined up by the kitchen door, 12 of them, each one sealed and labeled in marker. She'd written the contents on the side in clean block letters. Photos, menus, guest book, kitchen personal. Personal, 1 box. 8 years in this building and her life fit in one box marked personal. She caught me looking at it. "Don't," she said. I didn't say anything. "You were going to say something about how one box isn't enough." "I was going to say I have the same box, mine's in a closet in my apartment. Except it says Ruth on the side, and I haven't opened it in 3 months. She tilted her head. That same assessing look from when I'd first walked in, the one where she tried to figure out how much trouble I was going to be. But the look had changed over the past few hours. It was softer now, less guarded. She wasn't assessing my trouble, she was deciding how close to let me. The sky outside the window had shifted. Not light, not yet, but the dark had loosened. That deep black that happens before dawn, when the night starts thinning at the edges and you can almost feel the sun somewhere below the horizon waiting. Margot went to the front door. She opened it and stepped out onto the concrete and looked at the road. I followed her. The air hit me first. Cool and clean in the way that only happens after hours of rain. The parking lot was still wet, a thin film out across the asphalt, reflecting the diner's lights, but the flood was gone. The road beyond the lot was visible now. The pavement glistened in the glow from a single streetlight, and I could see the center line stretching out in both directions. East and south, 2 ways to leave. Margot stood with her arms crossed, staring down the road like she expected it to tell her something. "It's clearing fast," she said. "Yeah. You could probably make it out now if you drove slow." "Probably." She didn't look at me. She looked at the road and the thin fog sitting above the wet asphalt and the dark shapes of trees on the far side, their leaves dripping and heavy. My rental car sat at the edge of the lot. The windshield was beaded with water that caught the diner's light in small bright points. It looked patient, like it had been waiting all night without minding. We stood there for a while, close enough that I could smell the newspaper ink on her hands and the faint coffee smell that had soaked into her shirt over 8 years of mornings behind that counter. "Caleb." "Yeah." She turned to face me. Her arms were still crossed, but loosely, like she was holding herself together out of habit rather than need. "I don't do this," she said. "Do what?" "Talk to strangers in the middle of the night about my dead mother and my packed suitcase, and the fact that I've been hiding in a diner for 8 years because moving forward felt like giving something up." "You didn't do that. The jukebox did that. You can blame B7. She laughed, quiet and surprised, the kind that's more breath than sound, and her arms came undone. "You're the first person who's made me laugh in this building in 3 months, she said. "Harold tells jokes, but they're all from 1974. Lucille laughs at them, but she's being kind." "I'm funnier than Harold?" "You're funnier than Harold." "That's the best compliment I've gotten all year." "That's a low bar, Caleb. The bar was underground. You just raised it." She smiled again, the kind that stays. And then the smile faded, not all at once, but the way light fades, gradually, like someone turning a dimmer. She looked back at the diner. "I need to finish," she said. We went back inside. There wasn't much left to do. She swept behind the counter one final time. I folded the rag I'd been using all night and set it on the last clean surface. The counter was empty now. No coffee maker, no napkin dispenser, no menus, no register. Just a long stretch of laminate that showed every scratch and stain and burn mark it had collected over 4 decades. She ran her hand along the surface. Slowly, the way you run your hand along a railing when you're leaving a house for the last time, not looking for anything, just remembering through touch. Then she went to the brass hook by the front door. The keys were still hanging on the piece of twine. 2 keys, one for the front, one for the kitchen, small and brass and dull from years of handling. She lifted them off the hook. The hook was empty. The walls were empty. The room was empty except for stacked chairs and sealed boxes, and 2 people standing in a diner that had already stopped being a diner somewhere around 3 in the morning, when the last coffee was poured and the jukebox played its final song, and a woman named Dorothy's chocolate cake was remembered by a stranger who never got to taste it. Margot turned off the lights, one switch at a time. First the kitchen, then the counter lights, then the main room. Each click left a new layer of darkness until the only light came from the street lamp outside, slipping through the windows in pale strips across the floor. The amber glow of the jukebox was gone. She'd unplugged it after the last song. She stood by the door holding the keys. I stood next to her. "Ready?" I asked. "No." She said it simply, without drama, just the truth. "But I'm going anyway," she added. She stepped outside. I followed. She pulled the door shut behind us. The bell jingled one final time, muffled behind the glass. She locked the front door, turned the key, pulled it out. Then she stood there holding both keys in her palm, looking at them like they weighed more than brass should weigh. "I'll drop them at the property office on my way out," she said. We walked to our cars. They were parked side by side, which I hadn't realized until now. My rental and her old sedan, both wet, both pointed in different directions. Mine faced east, hers faced north, two arrows drawn on the same map that didn't cross. The sky was changing. A thin band of gray along the horizon, just above the tree line. Not sunrise, not yet, but the announcement of it. The kind of light that doesn't illuminate anything, it just tells you that illumination is coming. I stood by my car, she stood by hers. 20 feet of wet parking lot between us. "I should say something profound," I said. "Feels like the moment for it." "Please don't." I was going to say thank you. For what? For letting me stay, for the coffee, for not making me sit in my car all night. You helped me pack 12 boxes and scrub tables that are going to a landfill. We're even. We're not even. She looked at me. The gray light was catching the edges of her face now, the line of her jaw and the dark of her eyes, and the place where her hair had come loose from the clip and stayed loose all night. "Caleb." "Yeah." "Your grandmother told you to stop and eat a real meal and talk to a stranger. Did you do all of that tonight?" I thought about it. The booth and the coffee and the muffin from Lucille and every conversation we'd had between the packed boxes and the empty walls. "I did." "And did you let someone be kind to you?" My throat tightened. I pressed my hand against the jacket pocket where the letter sat, folded and safe against my chest. "Yeah," I said. "I did." She nodded slowly, certain like she'd been waiting to hear me say it. "Good." Then she got what she wanted. She opened her car door. Then she stopped. She reached into her back pocket and pulled out a piece of the newspaper she'd been using to wrap frames all night. She grabbed a pen from the dashboard and wrote something on the margin. She walked across the wet asphalt and handed it to me. A phone number. 10 digits in the same clean block letters she'd used on the boxes. "I'm not asking you to call," she said. "Okay. I'm giving you the option. In case you ever find yourself driving through the middle of nowhere at 1 in the morning and you need someone to talk to." I took the piece of newspaper. It was damp at the edges and it smelled like ink and dust and the inside of a building that didn't exist anymore. "Drive safe, Margot." "Slow down, Caleb." She got in her car, I got in mine. She pulled out of the lot first, turning left, heading north. I watched her taillights shrink along the wet road until they disappeared over a rise and the road was empty. I sat in the rental car for a minute, maybe two. The engine was running and the heater was on and the sky was getting lighter by the second. That slow gold and gray process that makes everything look clean and new and a little too honest for comfort. I pulled the letter out of my jacket pocket, unfolded it, read it one more time. "Slow down, eat a real meal, talk to a stranger, and let someone be kind to you." I had done all of it. Not because she told me to. Because a flood and a diner and a woman with newspaper ink on her fingers and a broken jukebox had conspired to put me exactly where my grandmother knew I needed to be. I folded the letter, put it back in the pocket, not the glove box this time, the pocket, where I could feel it. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the lot. The tires hissed on the wet road. The streetlight passed overhead, and then I was in the dark between towns, driving east, toward a morning I wasn't expecting to mean anything. The newspaper with her number was on the passenger seat. I looked at it once, then I looked at the road. I didn't know if I'd call. I didn't know if she wanted me to. I didn't know if what happened tonight was the beginning of something or the entire thing, complete and contained, a story with no sequel. What I knew was this. I drove into that parking lot at 10 o'clock at night, soaked and numb, and carrying a letter I was too afraid to read. And I drove out of it at dawn, dry-eyed and wide awake, and holding a phone number I might never dial, and a letter I'd read out loud to a stranger who understood every word. Something had shifted. Not fixed, not solved, not wrapped up with a bow, just shifted. Like a bone settling back into place after being out of alignment so long you forgot what straight felt like. The road stretched ahead of me, wet and empty, and going somewhere I hadn't decided yet. The sun cracked the horizon and threw long gold shadows across the fields, and, for the first time since I'd stood in that cemetery and watched them lower the woman who raised me into the ground, I felt something that wasn't grief. It wasn't happiness. It was closer to readiness. The quiet willingness to keep going, to drive into whatever came next with the windows down and the radio off, and the memory of a diner that doesn't exist anymore sitting warm in my chest like the last cup of coffee from the last pot. I drove. The road dried as I went. Behind me, a locked door, an empty building, and a woman heading north with a packed suitcase and a real smile, and the sound of B7 still caught somewhere in the walls. Ahead of me, just the road. And I took it slow. If any of that stayed with you, there are more stories like this one on the channel. I'll see you in the next one.